Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The technology revolution is creating a new wave of wealthy young Australians, but for now, the richest people in the country are still the miners. The list, Australia's richest 250, has been released by The Australian today, and as always, it makes for some great reading. Gina Rinehart and Andrew Forrest are first and second, each with around $32 billion. Overall wealth has surged, with the combined wealth of everybody on the list at more than $520 billion, up $50 billion from last year. John Stensholt is the editor of The List, and my guest this morning. John, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
How many lists? So you started this in BRW days a long time ago. How many years have you been compiling lists of the richest Australians, John?
Oh, I think we're getting to 15 years, Sean. So much has changed in that time, hasn't it? I mean, there's quite a few names that are still the same, but I reckon there are so many new and interesting people on there that have sort of come and gone and maybe come again and are emerging now. So yeah, it does. It provides that snapshot of Australian sort of business and the economy, I think.
So Gina Rinehart and Andrew Forrest are on the top. No real surprises there. That's on the back of iron ore prices. Were you surprised by the $32 billion? It's not bad, is it?
Oh, yeah, it's not bad. It's actually down a little bit from last year, would you believe? So, yeah, commodity prices are coming off a bit, but she made a record profit for her Hancock prospecting and is still going great guns and wants to keep expanding. So, she's one of those people on the list that sticks to her knitting, and her knitting really is mining. That is what she does.
Yeah. Okay. So love the miners, John, but let's get on to these tech barons. So Atlassian co-founders Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar are fourth and fifth with around $26 billion. 15 years ago, John, did you know Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar?
I think they were just finishing off university then. No, they just they'd started Atlassian, but I think they still, they had a ping pong table in the office, and that's probably about it, and a couple of caps. I think they still do that, but they're worth a lot more these days. Yeah, that's right. I mean, no one would have seen this coming. I mean, we all knew the internet was coming, technology was going to emerge, but who knew that, a company that makes, collaboration tools for workers to work together remotely or in the office together and that sort of thing would become a global success story from Sydney. I mean, that just shows you how things change. I mean, you can become a world-beating company from your own backyard, and we've got quite a few of those now.
Yeah, okay. I mean, 29 people are from the tech sector, 29 people on the list.
Yeah, so that's the second biggest category. So property's still the biggest one with 59. I mean, like, Australia's obsessed with property. There's so much property around it. You've seen what house prices have done, and commercial property's held up pretty well. But the fact that the technology sector is the second biggest now, as you say, 10 or 15 years ago, there might have been two people on the list in that regard. Now there's 29, and there's so many that are just below the cutoff as well. So you think of all those tech unicorns, they call them, the billion-dollar startups that emerge. Well, I mean, even at $1 billion now, depending on how much of a stake you own, you still might not make the list. So you've got to be worth a lot. Your company's got to be worth a lot. And, there's a lot of money that's being invested in this sector and a lot of money being made and will still be made. It's really probably just getting started, right?
Yeah. Well, so to get really rich, property still works, tech works, and mining. Are they the big three? Is mining the third?
Well, there's retail as well. But I think, again, there's a bit of a retail with a twist, right? So take a company like Culture Kings, which, is really a retail store phenomenon. It's for young and hip people, probably not like ourselves these days, unfortunately. But
John, speak for yourself.
Exactly. They go along and there's a really cool sort of scene in the shops, and there's, you can get your hair cut, play a bit of basketball, buy some goods. They also obviously did really well online. But, I mean, it's a Gold Coast couple, in their 30s, Torney and Simon Beard. They're worth, $503 million now. They're just about to open a store in Las Vegas and go over to America and conquer there. So it does show you that, maybe the bricks and mortar / e-commerce combining together still shows there's a retail, story out there.
And there's still Sam Prince, who's this year's highest ranked debutante at 112, worth about $1.2 billion. Sombrero, the Mexican takeaway business, that's still very bricks and mortar, really old style retail.
It is. And again, I mean, there's a lot of stores around Australia, but he's also taking it, would you believe, to America as well, and Europe and Asia. So, an Australian selling Mexican-themed food over in America, who would have thought it? But, I mean, that's what these entrepreneurs do. They have a crack.
Stay with me, John. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is John Stensholt, editor of The List, Australia's Richest 250. Now, look, I've got to talk about Clive Palmer, number 7 on the list, worth more than $18 billion, nearly doubling his wealth for a second year in a row. Clearly, all that ad spend for the United Australia Party isn't hurting his bottom line.
I did an interview with him, Sean. I had to go to his super yacht to chat, as you do with some of these billionaires.
So what's it like on the super yacht? Do you get a boat out, or do they just pull up on the wharf and you jump on? And do you feel kind of like you're in an episode of Entourage or something like that? Do you feel really rich on them?
There's a lot of mahogany paneling and very dark colours and beautiful. Well, there's jacuzzis and wet bars and that sort of thing as well. And there was signs for Clive's United Australia Party too, which is why he does things a little bit differently. But in that regard, I mean, he's spending $100 million, but he makes $620 million a year or so from mining royalties. So, his crack about that was, well, it's only a couple of months' work for me spending that money, isn't it? So, okay. It just shows you the different world these people live in.
Yeah, well, that's right. Trying to connect with the real people of Australia. That's quite funny. Now, putting the list together, it's quite a challenge, and I have worked for you many years ago in trying to do it. Do people like being on the list?
I think there are definitely some people that like being on the list. There are some people, most people accept being on the list at the very least. They know that annual call's coming. They'll talk to you in the background. They'll never admit it publicly, but some of the information that I get and see, you wouldn't believe. I mean, balance sheets, lists of assets, money sort of, being transferred here and there, and what's worth this and that. And they're very switched on. I mean, these people really know what they're worth. And the ones that say that they don't probably just haven't come to terms yet with having that much money. But when they do, they definitely want to know where they are on the list.
I remember once you asked me to, I won't mention the individual's name, but his company had sold, and I said to him he had $895 million based on your numbers. And he came back and said, it was 889. Can we go through it? We went through it, and there was a $6 million house, which he'd totally forgotten about. And he said, oh, yeah, sorry, you're right. It is $895 million. And I thought, wow, that is quite incredible that your numbers were so accurate to begin with, but also the fact that this guy had forgotten a $6 million house.
Well, that's right. When you have so many assets, you tend to lose track, I suspect. Look, you're right. I mean, they do know what they're doing, that they're very interested in where they come. It's a league table for them in a way that's sort of some sort of measure of success.
So do people like falling off the list?
I think they do one year, and then if they're not on it the next, they sort of start thinking, well, how do I get myself back on it? I've come across that several times. I know someone this year that even said, look, it's probably good for my business for me to be on this. So let's talk a bit more. I'm in a certain asset class that's gone up a lot, so I think I'll be back on it this year. It's good for when I talk to the banks about expanding or whatever, because, I mean, would you believe it gives them a bit of credibility or a bit of public notoriety.
What about James Packer? So 15 years ago when you started, the Packers would have always been in that top echelon, the top 3 or 4 or 5. Where are the Packers now?
So, I mean, James is about 4.2 billion, right? Which is actually, I mean, some of it has been split with his sister, obviously, in recent years, but it is still less than what the family inherited. Look, number 21 on the list. So you're right. If you would have said that a Packer would have fallen out of the top 20, I don't think anyone would have believed you back then. I mean, Kerry Packer was the richest person in Australia for pretty much most of the 80s, all of the 90s, and a little bit of the 2000s. So James is obviously hoping to and about to sell out of Crown Resorts, and really will keep an extremely low profile. Look, he still probably knows what he's worth, though, so there'll be interesting background chats, I suspect, in the future about where he should be on the list.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it. There are a lot of background chats goes on in your business, John, just talking to people about how rich they are, but I'm sure they don't actually want to be public about it.
That's right. And not all of the chats, Sean, as you know, take place on super yachts, I'll point out.
Okay, now look, a few things I want to talk about, your NFTs and the sort of philanthropic aspect of it, but I do just want to mention Len Ainsworth, 98 years old, still on it, and then at the other end of the spectrum is Nick Molnar from Afterpay. Pretty cool that we have such a range of ages on the list, John.
Yeah, and I think the technology boom has really, changed that, hasn't it? I mean, it used to take 20, 30, 40 years to become a billionaire. Now you can do it by your early 30s at the latest. I mean, even before that, right? So, yeah, it does show you how the world's changed and how Australia's changed with it. But the range of experiences, I mean, Len was, his old poker machines manufacturing factory was being blown up with gelignite way before Nick Molnar was born. So these people have had a lot of experiences in their lives. And, and you just see what the tech guys are going through now too. They're doing a lot very quickly.
Okay, now the list also reveals the top 25 donors. Andrew Forrest and Frank Lowy are numbers 1 and 2, donating $109 million and $51 million respectively. Is that a lot of money to be donating, given that they're billionaires?
Oh, well, look, it depends on how much, liquid cash they've got. Look, in proportional terms, I think there's clearly still room for improvement. There's no doubt about that. I mean, Andrew Forrest has put, good $2.5, almost $3 billion into his philanthropic foundation. He's still worth 30, so that's probably, 10% of what he's worth. Yeah, look, I mean, a lot of it's paper wealth too, so you've got to get that to crystallise it then to actually give it away. Look, I think that they are doing some very interesting things at earlier ages now. The tech sector, I think in particular, leads that way. Canva's Melanie Perkins and Cliff Obrecht have talked about giving most of their fortune away. Richard White at WiseTech, he's a fascinating guy. He's just put $50 million into his foundation to start STEM education programs in high schools. He says the future is getting people educated better to take into account the big tech boom. So, look, I mean, that is not just, giving money away and letting someone else look after it. I think that he's combining his business acumen with some altruistic purposes, and I think that's a really interesting way of doing it. And he wants other people to join in. He doesn't want the glory for himself. He wants other people to put money into it too.
He is actually specifically a really fascinating person. He's on the list, John, is he?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Richard's a billionaire. He's made $3 billion from software that moves all the, logistics around the world. I mean, he deals with governments, he deals with, all sorts of ports, this, that, and the other. He knows everyone around the world, I think, again, just from Sydney.
Yeah, incredible. Also, this year, you've commissioned artworks of 25 people featuring on the list, and they're going to be auctioned as non-fungible tokens, NFTs, a favourite topic on Fear and Greed. We've spent many times dissecting how much an NFT is worth here, John. Now, all money is being raised for the Vinnie's flood appeal. I think it's wonderful that the list itself, and the Australian, is doing something altruistic with it.
I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens. I mean, with these sort of endeavours, and also the auctioneering, I suppose, we'd like the billionaires, the rich people, their friends, family, grandkids, whoever knows what they're doing in the crypto world to bid against each other. And you're right, it is for a good purpose.
Do you reckon Len Ainsworth will be bidding?
I reckon Len's got a few family members that would have a look. I hope so.
Actually, I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether the individuals themselves or family members, as you say, actually buy the NFTs.
Well, they might buy it to take it off the market, and so no one else has it. So I think they might like to reflect on themselves too digitally.
John, it is a fantastic list, as always has been when you've put them together over the 15 years or so. Thank you very much for coming on this morning and talking to us on Fear and Greed.
Pleasure, Sean.
That was John Stensholt, editor of The List, Australia's Richest 250. This is a Fear and Greed daily interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.